accessed the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Hey, Green Lantern fans, you're listening to the podcast of OA, episode number 176. This episode, we're going to be talking about DC FanDome, Green Lantern Season 2, Number 7, and some listener feedback. I'm one of your co-hosts, Myron Rumsey, joined by my good buddy, Phil Bova. Phil, can you believe it's September already?
I can't. This year's going by so fast. Clark's going to be 8 months old soon, and oh my gosh, that dude is just everywhere. Everywhere. Kid's growing like a weed, and he's 29 inches long, 18, little over 18 pounds. He's a beast, but he's doing great. Family's doing great, man, and we're rocking into the school year now. The virtual learning process has begun.
Yeah, it's upon us. We started up school this week, and I've heard that one of our schools already has a positive case in their school, so the fun begins. How is Denise doing? Because, the last time we talked, she had tested positive for COVID and was doing okay.
Yeah, she's still doing great. She's back to work. She's working one day out of the building, and then the rest of the week she's working from home and stuff. And she's feeling fine. I think her senses of smell and taste are slowly coming back. But I mean, from what I understand, that takes a while, which is kind of an odd thing that has to do with COVID, and there's no answer to it yet. No doctors really have a reasonable explanation for it, but she's feeling 100% great.
That's great. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
So in terms of Green Lantern stuff, there's not a whole lot going on right now that we've heard about. Everybody knows that the DC FanDome event took place, a couple of weeks ago. Now, you and I are recording this on September 10th, so we're 2 days away from day 2 of the DC FanDome. Now, I try to be positive about things, but day 1 of DC FanDome was a huge letdown in terms of Green Lantern representation because there was really nothing. And the sad thing was that DC, at one point, I think it was on August 13th, they did a tweet where they were like, they showed a picture of Hal from the Morrison run, and it was a countdown image for DC FanDome. And then HBO Max's official Twitter feed responded, "I'm so excited to hear about what we might hear about the Green Lantern stuff." So, of course, that got everybody hyped up for thinking, oh, wow, maybe we're going to get a cast announcement, or we're going to find out what characters are going to be in the show. And there was not a mention anywhere. The word Green Lantern was never said. Now, there were a couple of pictures in the background, whoop-de-doo. So day 1 was kind of a joke. And day 2, I don't know, Phil, have you gone out and looked at the schedule for day 2?
Yeah, it's a joke.
Yeah.
There ain't nothing on there. No, it's all it's either Batman stuff or, and not that I'm trying to diminish this, but it's like DC panels or DC fans in different places like Italy. They're doing these different panels from world recognition for DC Comics. I don't know. I mean, I don't know the gist of it, but no, there's nothing on there. A Flash panel, I guess, for the series, of course. And
right. Now, for those that don't know, there are 6 worlds that you can go to during FanDome. Now, one of them is all the content from day 1. But there are 5 more worlds with content that is basically on demand for 24 hours. So you might think, well, maybe they're pressed for time because they're trying to cover so much. But there are some things. Now, some of these things are not panels, but even so, iZombie has a section on DC FanDome. Now, iZombie. Now, I'm not knocking iZombie. I liked the TV show. I enjoyed it very, very much. But the book ended in 2012, and the TV show ended a year ago. What's the point of doing anything to promote iZombie at this point?
You're being nice. I won't be nice. I don't see the point of any of this. I mean, it's like, I've always said this about DC's PR, and it's like, I don't understand what they do with their Green Lantern stuff. And I'm not just saying that because I'm biased and I'm a fan of Green Lantern, but I mean, come on. I mean, the only logical explanation I can gather is that COVID-19 put a crackdown on a lot of things being created and being made and shut down production on a lot of things. So maybe that was part of it. But even by that sense, why would HBO Max send a tweet out just to entice fans and then pull the carpet out from underneath them?
Right.
That doesn't do you any good.
Right. And if let's say, okay, maybe they don't have a lot of information, but they got to know something at this point. I mean, they have to have decided from the basic core premise of the show what characters are going to be featured. Maybe they've gone through the casting process. They could announce that, or they could do something. Or let's not forget, it's also Green Lantern's 80th anniversary. DC FanDome Day 1 had a whole panel on Wonder Woman's 80th anniversary, announcing a logo for Wonder Woman's 80th anniversary, and her 80th anniversary isn't until next year.
Exactly. Exactly.
There's a panel here on the costumes of Batman Returns. Really?
You already know what I'm going to say about Batman stuff.
I know, but this is just more examples of stuff that is like, there could have been something. There's stuff in here for Gotham, the TV show. How long has that been off the air? 2 years? A year at least?
Yeah, there's a panel for Pennyworth.
Yeah. The only reference I found to Green Lantern is in the kids zone. There's a bunch of crafting stuff, and there's a DC origami on how to do a Green Lantern ring.
Okay, I'm just gonna say this: big effing deal. I mean, that's cool, but big effing deal, man. That doesn't do anything to the fans.
Right now, there might be, there's a panel on Latino heroes, so maybe you'll see something with Kyle Rayner and Jessica Cruz mentioned in there, but there's nothing representative of Green Lantern. There's not a single thing in here to get excited about as a Green Lantern fan.
And so who would you like? I guess I'd have to ask this question. If you were afforded the opportunity to sit down and talk to, I'll just throw Jim Lee out there, what would you pose to him as a question as to, and this would be after FanDome Part 2, right? Mm-hmm. Which we already know there's not going to be Green Lantern content on there. I mean, my hopes were up for the first one, but to be quite honest with you, I was also looking forward to the Snyder Cut reveal, which that turned out to be really, really cool.
Yeah.
But so let's say DC FanDome Part 2 comes and goes. There's no Green Lantern content, so you're afforded a sit down with Jim Lee. How could you legitimately hold your frustration in check while approaching him about what the plans are for DC to do anything with Green Lantern related? Anything.
I think I'd have a hard time, to be honest. I mean,
yeah.
It takes a lot to get me upset. It really does. And I'm passionate about this. I mean, everybody knows I'm passionate about the Green Lantern franchise, but it's difficult to maintain that frustration. But I think I would try to hold myself back long enough to try to at least let him understand what it feels like as a Green Lantern fan to see all of this energy being spent on promoting DC Comics and DC's multimedia characters and not see an ounce of representation. Because as we are pummeled over the head, representation matters.
Yeah, it does. And transparency is important too. I mean, at least be upfront and honest. I mean, even at this point, I would have been happy with the fact that, hey, just so Green Lantern fans know, we're still on the core process. Production has been put on hold because of COVID. Okay, so at least let me have the point to be fuming mad because of COVID and production being on hold. But at least I have an answer to something, and at least I know that, okay, so it's been pushed back as usual. But let me deal with that. Let me cope with that, and look forward to when the next release of whatever information about it's going to be again.
Right. It's so unsettling. I posted a thing on social media of it was the old Lucy pulling the football out from Charlie Brown, and I put the DC logo over Lucy and Green Lantern FanDome over Charlie Brown as he's in midair, and the word balloon said "Arg, the old bait and switch again," and that's it. I sent it to I tagged Jim Lee and DC in it. Of course, nobody responded. And I've seen a lot of Green Lantern fans on Twitter up in arms over it and voicing their frustration, but no one has bothered to address the fans.
No, it's like the whole secrecy thing. Like everything's got to be some kind of top secret project, and Okay, that's great. That you're entitled to that. But I mean, you're also entitled to engage with your fandom every once in a while, because the other one's paying for your crap, man. I mean, come on. I was after the FanDome came and went, and I knew there wasn't anything Green Lantern stuff. I was just like, yeah, I'm starting to rethink my whole love for DC processes. I'm even found myself, because I read Wonder Woman, I read Superman, and I read Justice League, and I've even found myself disgusted to even want to start even keep reading those titles. I mean, I read The Flash, and I'm a big Flash fan, and I know Josh Williamson's not going to be on that anymore, and that's even got me thinking whether I even want to read that moving forward. There's a lot of things that are taking place right now to where, why should I hang around DC? And of course, I've always been a big fan of indie comics, so like I've been doing stuff like titles like Join the Future, and there's a myriad of other titles out there that are published by indie comics and stuff, and I found a lot of love with a lot of those, but I still remain true to my Green Lantern character, and even that we don't even know what's going to happen after the Morrison run's over.
True, and
so why hang out? Why am I hanging around for?
Right, and I've heard some people say, well, Green Lantern's not as popular as he used to be. Well, I kind of call BS on it a little bit, because if you look at the sales numbers now, since COVID started, there are no reliable sales numbers between COVID being the impact on the industry and DC now moving away from Diamond. So those numbers are not as readily available. But if you go back to February, January timeframe, you were looking through, this was at the time of the Black Stars miniseries and the launch of season 2. The Green Lantern was outselling everything in DC's lineup except for Justice League and Batman and some event books.
Well, and you can't tell me that he's not as popular anymore when you have Jessica Cruz in Odyssey, and you have Jon Stewart in Justice League, and then I mean, the characters are spread out, mind you, but it can't be any more of a bottom line seller than if you look over at Marvel, and then you got half the characters like the Hulk or Guardians of the Galaxy. Those books may not be doing well, but they still served a franchise movie. I mean, come on.
Right. But anyway, let try to be more positive, I guess. We'll see. Maybe we'll be surprised. I doubt it, but
I'm not going to hold my breath, man.
I me either.
You can be positive, and that's what I love about you the most. But like, I'm just going to sit here and be PO'd and stew in my own wallow in my own self-pity.
On Saturday, I'll probably be vocal on social media, on Twitter, just to poke it, just because if they don't hear from fans that they're upset, they can continue to bury their head in the sand.
Well, that's true too. I'll rail on them if I know nothing comes out for the next one this Saturday. Oh, I'll rail hard. I'll probably send a big long tweet, and I'll make sure I attach anybody that has to do with the upper echelon of DC publications.
Right.
I'll put them all on there. I mean, you might as well. The only way the only way you're going to know is if you voice your opinion about it.
Right. And if they only understand dollars and cents, that's all they get. I mean, not to beat a dead horse, but as a DC fan, there was a time which I was buying probably 90% of the DC line. I felt very engaged in the universe. This was, during the Blackest Night days and that era, and even through New 52, I did not enjoy New 52. I kind of liked it for the most part. But when it came to Rebirth, as much as that was a positive take on the DC universe, I felt so disconnected from everything. I'm now only buying Green Lantern, and I'm buying Strange Adventures. And that's about it for my, and I was spending a good chunk of money. I was buying nearly every book in the line at one point.
Yeah. And it's sad when you got to scale back because you feel like you're getting burned by a company that's supposed to be looking out for their fans. And I'll go back to what I said before. DC and Marvel are gunning for a spot at the big table. The most money they can make on whatever franchises they can put out there. And when you look over at the indie publications, They're not looking out for that kind of stuff. They're looking out for the love of their fans and the best interest of their writers and their creators. And that's the only way I'm going to say it. I mean, because it's true. I mean, they're allowed to produce content that they want to produce, and it gets published, and fans get behind it, and they like it. It may go for 6 issues, may go for 12. You never know how long it's going to go, but there's an ever-changing process when it comes to indie comics and stuff. DC and Marvel are just hinging on the fact of how much money they can make per their sales, and what spot they have at the media table, and that's I think that's where their bottom line goes to. I think that's where they drive for.
I wouldn't disagree.
But that's just one man's opinion.
So to change the subject, there is a new book out called The Games That Weren't by Frank Gaskin. And I've mentioned this on the show before. It's a 644-page book. And this book is about video games from the 70s through, I think, 2015. Games that didn't make it to release. Some of them morphed to become other games and so on and so forth. And the reason why I bring it up is there was a Green Lantern game in development in 1991. A company called Ocean, who had some big hits with your favorite Batman, had rights to the DC catalog, and they started working on a Green Lantern game. And it was in development for a long time. Long story short, when 1994 came and Emerald Twilight came, Ocean got told by DC Comics, well, you can't use HAL anymore. So they had to go back and kind of start all over again to some extent. And change it to Kyle Rayner and change some of the elements of the story. And anyway, the history of that game's development is in this book called The Games That Weren't. And I actually got interviewed for this book because the author wanted, he knew that what was going on in DC Comics had impact on the game development, but the game developers that he could interview didn't really have a lot of detail. So he was looking for somebody to give him some background, and he came across the blog of OA, contacted me. Gosh, it must have been 2 years ago, and we did a little mock interview. And so I have a few quotes of the book, which is for me a big kick. But I don't expect anybody to go out and buy the book, because unless you're really a big video game fan, it's a British book, so it's $29.99 in pounds. So it's a little bit more in cash, in American money. And but boy, what a great production. I have never received an item packed as well as this book was packed. Normally when you buy hardcover books, oftentimes there is corner damage, and this book was so well protected. I was amazed. But it was neat to see some of the pictures from the production that I had not seen before. I had seen some images that were in a video game magazine back in the day. And I got to remember, this was 16-bit graphics, so don't expect a whole lot. We're talking 16-bit sprites back then. And but there's some images from there, and actually out on YouTube, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes. There's a link to some of the soundtrack for the game that the composer put up on YouTube, and actually some of that music got used for a Waterworld game instead, because that one actually made it to production. But what ended up happening with the Green Lantern game, long story short, is DC changed track to Kyle, and so they asked Ocean to go back and redesign some things, and then they got to that, and then Zero Hour came up, and they wanted them to include Parallax in the game, and basically it went from 91 to I think 95 or 96, and it didn't come out, and Ocean was having financial troubles, and it was considered not commercially viable anymore at that point, and it never came out. It never saw the light of day.
Disappointing. Yeah, I read some of the stuff you put on there. It's pretty cool. I wouldn't mind getting that book, man. They got a series out on Netflix that talks about the video. It's a video game series. Kind of talks about I think the first episode kind of went into remember that game Adventure from Atari?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and it was the first known Easter egg that creator put out when they put that secret room in there. And because a lot of the creators and a lot of the content people that were behind those games didn't get accolades or didn't get representation for their video games. They didn't even get name recognition back then. So the producer of that game put that Easter egg in there just because of that, in spite of them. And they didn't even get royalties from any of those games because anybody could make a cartridge for Atari back in that day. But the gaming industry has progressed a long, long, long way since when I first sat down and played Atari 2600 back in the 80s or early or late 70s for that matter.
Oh yeah. I started with the 2600 as well.
Yeah. Yeah, man. It's jump started to levels I never thought it would go. But I mean, with the advancement of computers and the advancement of the chip, I mean, it's no wonder why it's went the way it went. But it's good to see that a lot of like stuff like that book is pinpointing creators for their endeavors. You know, I mean, it's kind of like the ET game. I mean, sure, it was a blotch on the on the Atari world, but still, I mean, it's a part of gaming history, and all that stuff's important. Especially even the Green Lantern mention. I mean, come on, that's good stuff, man. That's good to know the history of how the gaming industry worked and games that could have and would have been, but we never had the chance to see or never had the chance to play. And then in retrospect, look at all the games that did come out that weren't worth a crap to begin with. And it's like, how could they have done any worse? I mean, they should have made that. It probably would have done better than half the games we've ended up with. But whatever.
Yeah, it's interesting though. But that would have been the first Green Lantern game. But instead we got Green Lantern Rise of the Manhunters, which was a good game as well.
Yeah, that wasn't too bad, you know. And I played the DC Universe online, and you know, it's cool to play the Green Lantern stuff in there because you can get constructs and everything, and you know, you start leveling up your character, and you can design your own character if you want. It's not a bad, and they even have the storylines. I think they got the Emotional Spectrum storyline in there somewhere, but I haven't played it yet. But it's cool.
Yeah, it's neat. There was a Justice League game called Justice League Heroes that came out in 2006.
Was Green Lantern in that?
Yep. It was John, and then there was a Hellskin.
Well, you know, he's also in the Lego games. You know, Hal Jordan, Jessica Cruz is in there too. Well, I mean, for that matter, they got all the members. They even got Atrocitus in there.
Yep, and they've used Hal and Atrocitus in the Injustice games.
Yeah, that's true.
But anyway, so let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about Green Lantern Season 2, issue number 7.
All right. Hello, fellow Owens, and welcome back to another segment of Know Your Core. This week we got Iolande, whose first appearance was in the Green Lantern Corps Volume 2, Number 1, August of 2006. This character was created by Dave Gibbons and Patrick Gleason. She hails from Space Sector 1417 and the home planet of Betrasis. Her partner happens to be Saranac Natu. Now, Iolande was the daughter of Noel, king of Betrasis, and thus the princess of the planet. One of her brothers, Ragnar, longed to be a member of the Green Lantern Corps and devised a way to become one by killing all his potential rivals, including their other brother, Centaur, and the current members of this corps in that sector. Lanterns Guy Gardner and Saranac Natu caught on to his plan and granted him a ring briefly to lure him into a trap. After their father had Ragnar executed for his crimes, Natu granted Iolande the power ring that had belonged to Mert, her fallen partner. And there you have it. Another awesome member of the Green Lantern Corps, Iolande, brought to you by the Podcast of Oa.
Well, Brother Phil, we've got a Green Lantern book to talk about, issue 7 of season 2. And, you know, before we start talking about the interior, you know, it was funny you mentioned the cover just before I hit record, and I was going to bring it up as well. That cover is so neat. And I don't know whether, did it stand out? Did you buy this digitally or did you buy it physically?
Nah, but I got a digital copy.
I think digitally it stood out more than the paper version, but the skull on the cover, where you've got, you know, Hal's head is kind of where the nose would be, and there's the skull behind it. I just thought that was so cool.
Yeah, it's really neat looking. I like that. This just looks like the Spectre again. Just he's got that whole Spectre quality about him.
Now this issue was interesting because I'm still not sure whether this is reality or if this is a near-death dream.
Well, I mean, there's only one person that could answer that right now, and that would be Grant Morrison. But then you'd have to get into that dude's brain long enough to understand if that's what he's going for, because, the writing in this, to me, seemed really complex, more so than some of the other issues I've read, which is kind of funny because on the front cover, I keep looking at the front cover and it says ages 13 and up, DCComics.com. It's like, dude, I can't. There's probably 20-something, 30-something years old that wouldn't even understand what the heck is going on in this book.
I'm still not 100% sure if I know what happened in this issue. Because it's dense, but it's also not. Some of this is up for interpretation, and so I think you could have people read the book and get something completely different out of it.
Yeah,
because it's just not that clear. Now it starts out with the young Guardians, and they're talking about. It's almost like a brief tour of history from their perspective. And I really like this first page where you see kind of the birth of the emotional spectrum. And you see the little cosmic yin-yang symbol, which I thought was kind of cool. And then you see the colors divide, and then you see it divide into the spectrum. And I loved what Liam Sharp did with the 7 different faces and different emotions to go with the colors.
Neat.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool. And
that was really neat.
They kind of allude to the Ultra War being this, there's this whole theory about the universe expands, and then it gets to a point at which it expands to the point it can't hold itself up anymore because it's so expansive. And it almost sounds like the same kind of thing where the universe or the multiverse is around for so long, eventually it becomes a war of molecules versus molecules in a struggle because everything is so spread out.
Well, I think so. If I may, I think what I got from this is it's juxtaposing the whole antimatter universe versus like the war between the antimatter and matter universe, but part 2 maybe.
Yeah, they start talking about world versus world and empire versus empire, state versus state, then neighbor versus neighbor, and then molecule versus molecule.
Right.
It just sounds like the multiverse tearing itself apart from the inside. It's interesting, for sure. And then Hal's like, well, it sounds like a hell of a show. And you've got Hal there, and they make reference to the Spectre without using the name the Spectre, but they certainly make reference to that. And they call it's interesting. Who else can judge the divided but a man? But who but a divided man? Which I thought was kind of interesting. And Hal's kind of struggling with this big picture thinking of the Guardians and the fact that Sector General is slowly entering the atmosphere and they're all going to die, and he wants to save them despite anything, but he can't. He can't touch them. He can't do anything.
Which is kind of funny because he should reflectively be harkening back to the time he was Spectre, and he would have this. Because this image right here where he's like trying to reach out for that spaceship or whatever it is breaking up. It kind of reminded me of the Spectre a lot. Like that's something that he would have done.
Sure, yeah.
And you would have thought he might have had a reflection point with that. But he responds a little bit differently in this, because he complained, why can't I do anything? Why can't I touch them?
And you've got the nurse holding Trilla True as she's dying, and Raikatora trying to, this guy's fighting till the bitter end to hold everything together, but he just can't do it. And you see Hal's body there. And you find out that they're going to basically send Hal on a mission. And we don't know exactly what the mission is at this point. But they're kind of blaming Hal. He's dead because you didn't follow what our rules are. You're dead because of this. And, you didn't follow the right path because you didn't follow our direction. And now we've got to do what's necessary. And I love the line where they say, we see the macro picture and must act accordingly. one of us will disconnect. And so basically it harkens back a little bit to that Hard Traveling Heroes thing where, Hal and Ganthet and Ollie went on the road trip. And here's one of the young Guardians who's departing from Oa and joining Hal in the afterlife, essentially.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And he doesn't understand this being, I shouldn't say he, because we don't know what gender it is, but the Guardian doesn't quite know how to function at first, being alone.
Because he's separate from, what is it, Gestalt?
Yeah, separate from the rest of them. And then we get the neat flash to Planet Ugo, that planet that's got Hal's body mass on it. And we see the Star Sapphire of, I don't remember which Earth it is, but we see the Star Sapphire, and we see the Stan Lee Green Lantern character that he created, and I can't remember his last name.
Not Len Wein, right?
Len Lewis.
No,
Len Lewis.
Len Lewis.
Yep. And we see Len Lewis there, and it's a flashback to, if you remember back to season 1, I think it was issues 10 and 11, where he met Zundernell, and he was that giant gold guy, and the Guardians of the Multiverse show up and they kind of arrest him. And we see him there, and he's talking about the Cosmic Grail. And it's interesting to read what he says now, because suddenly it starts to make a little bit more sense. I serve the fallen, broken light that glows yet dimmer in the night. The flame burns low that's bright in hell. Beware my fate. Because what we see is Hal ends up seeing the Cosmic Grail, and it's very bright, and he charges himself off of it, which is kind of interesting. But Zundernell, he kind of wakes up and is like, oh my gosh, they're coming, and the Nomad Empire returns, which we don't know what that means yet. But the multi-crisis has begun, and he's kind of all riled up, and then we cut back to Hal again.
And then it's got a nod to Blackest Night in here, too.
Yeah. Which I thought was interesting, because, Hal's kind of having this philosophical debate with this Guardian, saying, would you guys have sided with the Black Lanterns? Because, and it's interesting, because you almost get this almost sympathetic tone from the new Guardians, in that they're looking at the universe differently than the old Guardians did. And they kind of see all points of view, even the ones that are negative from our perspective.
Well, and he even says that they know everything but understand nothing at the same time.
Yeah, I thought that was a neat line.
Mm-hmm. Know everything and understand nothing, and that's easy that's easy not to comprehend that, because it makes sense just for the smallest nature of how it says it. You could know everything, but never fully understand how everything is.
Right. There's such a big difference between knowledge and understanding.
Uh-huh.
Somebody can be very book smart and know dates and facts, and that's knowledge, but that's not understanding of how things work.
No, because you're because you're not thinking about the whys. If you don't think about the whys, you're not including the human nature into it, or for that matter, any nature into it, emotional or otherwise.
And you can kind of see that this new Guardian kind of reveals to Hal that his unpredictability is what intrigues the Guardians about him, and that they don't really understand him.
Which is weird, because it seems like the other Guardians kind of did understand Hal.
Yeah, I think they understood that he's going to do what he's going to do, and they kind of figured out how to I don't want to say work the system, but they figured out how to get the best out of Hal, and knew when to challenge him and when not to challenge him. And they knew he would do what he was going to do. As unpredictable as that might be, he'd get the results. And these guys are kind of like, we're telling you to do stuff, and you're just not listening to what we're saying.
And then they make him take a walk through all his romantic life.
Yeah, I really loved that panel. I thought it was really cool. It was interesting to see Carol's face show up under green, which I thought was kind of interesting. Now, do you recognize all of the past loves of Hal's life out of that spectrum?
The only ones I don't recognize is Doreen. I don't remember her. Vaguely remember. I don't remember Carrie that well. I know Joan and Olivia and Jill and Carol, and Eve is kind of vague to me. But the other four I know.
So Eve we've seen in this run.
Right.
So we've gotten, he used her, he used Jillian, he used Olivia a little bit. So Carrie Limbo was Guy Gardner's girlfriend at the time when Guy Gardner was thought to be dead and was in the Phantom Zone.
Oh.
And so she was also a telepath, and she and Hal fell in love while Guy is out there, and they were about to be married when Guy was able to break through from the Phantom Zone, and Carrie Limbo's psychic abilities allowed her to communicate with him, and that broke off the relationship.
Interesting. Go you. Hey, do you think there's a significance to how each of their faces are? Because you look at Carol's looking straight, but then everyone else's heads is starting to turn as it starts to go to the outer panels.
I thought that was really symbolically interesting. I don't know whether that's supposed to be relational to the girls or relational to the emotions, but yeah, I thought that was really interesting. Now, Doreen is not really Doreen's original name. Her real name is Onu Murtu, and she was an alien who fled her world because some rulers overtook her planet, and she fled to Earth to try to find a strategy. And so to blend in, she took an Earth name named Doreen Clay, and she and Hal had a thing.
Dang, look at you, man. Wow.
Then let's see.
You really pulled those out.
Joan appeared in one issue. Joan was okay. So back in the old days of Volume 2, back in issue 50, right before then, Hal and Carol broke up and Hal left Ferris Air. And so in issue 50, he's taken on a gig, basically flying a charter plane for a company. And the daughter of the owner is named Joan. It's Joan Colby. And she and Hal are kind of hinting at romance, but not really going there yet. And Hal's like, I just need this break. I need to be more Hal and less Green Lantern. I need to not rely on my ring so much unless I have to use it. And, part of what happened with Carol was Green Lantern came in between me and Carol. So he's thinking, well, maybe Joan is the character I need. And maybe she's the woman I need just to get a clean break. And something happens. There's a long story short, her brother who died in the war had smuggled a photo, a picture, a painting home with him from Japan. And people came to try to find it, and they were attacked. And so Hal, in fighting the bad guys in their home, the Brawl goes into her room and he sees a Green Lantern poster on the wall. And he's like, oh no, not again. so he splits town, and they never become an item per se. But that was her only appearance. And it actually was only half the issue, because this is back in the day when you got 2 stories in every 12-cent issue. So she appeared in a handful of pages, but Hal didn't want anything to do with her after he saw the Green Lantern poster, because he's like, I'm not going down that road again.
Interesting. That's really interesting.
Yeah, another.
Now, do you think these females are all synonymous with the emotional spectrum that they're placed in? I mean, you got Carol with Will, and then Eve is Hope. Carrie would be, I guess, passion, for that matter.
Yeah, it could very well be. It's an interesting series of choices. For example, Arisha is not there,
right?
And there were other women along the way, but it's interesting to see that array of characters. And again, he used some of them, so that was neat. But then he didn't others. So a lot of people that don't know the history are like, oh, who's this and who's that? And I'll admit, I remember the name Joan, but she was in one issue from way back in the day. I mean, I don't even think I was born yet. So I was 1967. I was 3.
So any random fan out there, just go ahead and Google Hal Jordan's love interest and see what comes up.
But I thought it was a neat image that Liam chose, and I thought the character choices were interesting. And like you pointed out, the fact that Carol is looking dead on and the rest of them are slowly looking away, and to varying degrees and angles, I thought was really fascinating.
I mean, there's got to be a reason for it. I mean, if we've learned anything from Morrison's writing, I mean, he has a purpose for what he does. And if the purpose is there, then Sharp's art would obviously reflect that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
But we'd have to read like a storyboard on this whole process to, I guess, to grasp the big concept, or read it until the end to see if it doesn't flesh itself out.
I would love to see this 2-season set put together in one big hardcover with some of the, like, I don't want to say an editor's cut or director's cut, but they've done this with certain other books where they've given you the scripts or the notes in the back. Or one of my favorite books to read is the DC Final Frontier book, the new Frontier book. Excuse me, the new Frontier book. The Absolute Edition has all these notes in the back from Darwin Cook, and you get an idea of what all of his inspirations were for little Easter eggs and things that are there that people may not pick up on, but you see all the history and all the work he did. And I almost kind of want to see something like that for this, because there's so many little details, and I'm sure we're missing some of them. I'm sure we are, but it'd be interesting to see some of this stuff.
Yeah, that's a great edition, by the way. It's one of my favorite hardcover editions.
So we see Hal encounter the Cosmic Grail, which looks remarkably like his power battery.
Mm-hmm.
And the Guardians, the original Guardians, are all fighting each other. And they find out, now you kind of find out what Hal's mission is they're there to save one of the Guardians. And that Guardian turns out to be Rami, of all people.
Yeah, I've noticed that. It's interesting that they chose him.
Yeah. And Rami tells Hal he's got to charge his ring at the Cosmic Grail. So you see Hal with the cape charging his ring, and then he's attacked by his other selves.
They're divided.
Yeah, and I thought that was really cool, because you see the Gray Templed Hal, you see the Black Star Hal, you see Classic Hal, you even see the Paul Manning Hal, which is cool.
What's the one with the gray temples?
That's from Volume 3 when Hal had the Gray Temples.
Gotcha.
And Paul Manning, for those that don't know, that might be new to the mythology, there was a whole series of backup plots back in the day during the Silver Age where Hal was plucked from the 20th century to the far-flung future and kind of brainwashed to be a leader for people. And it was his name in the future was Paul Manning. And so you see him there. It's that character kind of has like almost a cross on his head. Or the odd helmet. That's Paul Manning.
Interesting.
But I thought it was cool that he's fighting himself. He's the divided man, which now suddenly makes all kinds of sense. And it's interesting because we see Hal's confidence. Hal's not the guy who we saw who was like, well, I'm going to, Carol dumped me. I'm going to go out and travel and be an insurance salesman or a toy salesman. All of those odd, because the truck driver, there was a phase where he was a truck driver. He's not that. He goes, I'm not at war with any of my contradictions or my mistakes or my discarded selves. I worked all that out. And I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, and then the next page when he tells him, I'm not divided, I'm a core.
Yeah, I thought that was really kind of interesting. I thought it was an interesting word choice to say I'm a core. But he accepts all of those various versions of himself. To me, it's a different version of Hal. This is a Hal who has his act together. And he's not necessarily the careless guy, but I could see how people would think of him as careless. But his brain is working that quickly. Mm-hmm. And that's neat to see that again. And it's interesting because they think, he goes into this whole lecture about what it means to be a Green Lantern, which I thought was really a good and very timely speech.
It is, and especially what it means to him to be a Green. Yep. But then they put on him that he was serving as a Death Lantern.
Yeah, and I was a little confused by that at first. They wanted to be Death Lantern, and it's interesting because Hal then gets him and says, well, you don't realize, I'm not dead. You think you know how the universe works. You're too young to understand how the universe works. And then they counter and say, well, you're old to realize it can change, which I thought was kind of interesting. But he reminds him of the nanosurgeons.
And they repair any damage.
Yeah, it repair any damage in 2 hours.
Little did you know that I've been fixed the whole time here, fellas.
The joke is on you. That was kind of interesting. And they say, well, if you go back, you're going to forget what you've learned, and your memory is going to be essentially wiped. But Hal's not having any of that, and he does it. And I thought, this is the second time you see Hal with this green light coming out of his left eye. And we saw it earlier in that other panel, and I was like, gosh, am I missing something there? And I don't know whether that's just an artistic choice by Liam Sharp, and it's coincidental that it appears twice in the issue that way. But I thought it was interesting. And I know I use the word interesting a lot because I find the series very interesting. It takes a lot to digest sometimes, and you have to reread it and maybe get different meanings from it and try to figure out exactly what's going on.
I read this twice because, for two reasons. Number one, because of the dialogue. I needed to ingest it twice. But number two, I like the panel placement that Sharp uses in this book. I mean, the transparent panels, and then some of the panels, how they're juxtaposed next to each other, like the next one with all the little capsules, and they're all individual panels in their own right. It's just how he's got them all placed on here. It makes it look really, really good. I mean, just really, really awesome art.
It's what I find about Liam Sharp in this run is his art style. I want to say it morphs, but he adapts his art style a little bit to the type of story Morrison is doing. We saw at one point it looked like very Frank Frazetta looking, and inspired by Frank Frazetta. And we've seen stuff that was inspired by Jack Kirby. So it's not that he's trying to copy someone's style, but his art style from issue to issue kind of transformed to match the tone of the book.
Evolves. I mean, his art style just evolves like with everything.
I just love some of the, when there's that page where they show Planet Hippocrates and the colors and the swirling of the colors. Just beautiful stuff.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the planet that Flash Gordon had to fly to.
Oh, yeah. Back in the old movie. You're right.
Yeah. Planet Hippocrates.
And, basically he, the Nurse Alaqua saved Trilla True, and everybody's healing, and it looks like it's going to be, happily ever after, at least for this issue, and the Guardians are like, you don't understand, it's out of our control now. All we can do is prepare for the end.
And then we go straight to Cord.
Yeah, and things aren't looking good over there either.
No, it's a very, very dark machine world.
It's interesting because it's not the Cord that we're used to seeing.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
It's very cyborgy.
Especially the old weaponers, these don't look like anything like the weaponers from Cord that we're used to seeing in the past.
Well, and Grant calls them weaponeers too, which is kind of different.
Yeah, that's true. You're right. I didn't even pick up on that. Weaponeer 800s. Huh.
And Weaponeer 666, and they talk about Director Quala. So, we'll see what happens, but, they talk about Cord prevails eternal, and in the next page you see a kind of a precursor to the next issue where you see the Green Lanterns going off on an attack.
There's Volk.
Yeah, I love like his head is exploding. Like he's not happy.
It's kind of how I've looked the last couple of weeks at work.
yeah, I know what you mean. It's kind of felt like that a couple times. And Trilla looks to have mended herself, so I'm assuming it's a forward a little bit to the future.
But what's with that arm? It looks like a construct arm.
Yeah. I don't know whether maybe that's damage. Well, she lost that arm in the last issue.
Yeah. Okay. So that makes sense why it would look like that.
So maybe she's doing a little bit of the construct. And
then sadly we go to the FanDome Explore the Universe on September 12th, and oh look, nothing Green Lantern on there.
You had to end it on a downer, didn't you?
I did. Oh wait, there's 2 pages of it. Nothing on either pages. Yeah, well, no, that was an awesome issue, man.
It is, and I can understand people that this run has not been universally praised. Some people have a real hard time with it. They just want straightforward super book storytelling, and I get that. I find I feel like I get my money's worth out of the issues because I read them multiple times. Sometimes, but in the old days, during the John's run and during the Venditti run, you could pick up an issue and read it in 5-10 minutes and you're done.
Yeah. But we knew this going way back to when this first started. But how many times did we talk about what version of Grant Morrison we were going to get for this series, and look how complex it's been. It's just been so rich and so deep in its content that, even you pulling it apart helps me out all the time, with a lot of the flashbacks and things that take place. But man, it's been incredible so far. And there's only 4 more issues left? 5?
5, yeah, 5 more issues. I think too, it's the kind of book that reads better, not reading it month to month, if that makes sense. Because
you're right.
I think there's details that carry over from issue to issue, and when you've got a month or so in between the issues, it's hard to keep all that in your head. And so I think this is one of those series that is going to read better in a collected form than it actually does in the monthly form.
I would agree. It's easier to digest when you can do it all in one sitting, especially back to back to back to back.
I think, they could do a Morrison bundle of season 1 and season 2 with the miniseries in between, and you bundle it with some marijuana, and I think it would be a big hit. Because it would suddenly all make sense. No, I get the criticism. When we've talked with Chad and Mark over on the Lantern Cast, they're not digging it as much as we are, and that's fine. I think it's not a straightforward superhero book, and we're not used to that. And some of it is a little hard to wrap our head around sometimes. It requires a lot of thinking, and sometimes it is hard to understand what Morrison is saying. And so I've basically decided I have to surrender those moments thinking I'm going to get clarity as it continues to go. This is just the Morrison style of storytelling. Things are going to happen that don't necessarily make sense. And eventually they do. It just sometimes just takes time. It's that investment. You really have to invest yourself in the book.
Yep, you do, and you really have to and you have to give yourself your time and space to read it. You can't just sit there and say, "Well, I'm going to burn through this real quick and easy." Well, you can, but in order to understand it, you really need to sit and really read it without distraction.
The only thing I was going to ask your opinion on is the one thing that threw me off is in the opening couple of pages. What's with the green triangles?
Let me go back to that. Hold on.
Because on the second page, you get this big green triangle pointing to the right, and then you get to the next page, and there's a triangle pointing up and one pointing down, but you never see one going to the left. And the OCD in me is like, wait a minute, they're missing a triangle.
Yeah, you're right. It kind of does.
And there's nothing in that triangle. The other ones at least have text and stuff in them.
I wonder if that was on purpose. But yeah. I'm gonna ask. We should reach out to Liam on Twitter and ask him.
I flipped through when I got in reading the book the first time. I'm like, something doesn't feel right. And I go back and look. It's the triangle. The triangle. There's not a fourth triangle in here pointing in the direction. And I'm flipping through, going, did I miss it? Did I miss it? And I went a little crazy there for a bit. Especially
when the one on that first page with the Guardians and those whatever those things are with the lights coming out of their eyes. So that one's so like. It's like right there in your face. Doesn't even fit.
Well, and those are the old Guardians.
The old Guardians, right? And it doesn't even fit on that page. Like it doesn't go.
It's just there. And I was like, what's that about? And I'm like, I go to the next page and there's 2. So I'm thinking, okay, the next page are going to be 3. Nope, there's not 3. And I go back and I'm like, okay, these 2 are up and down and that one's right. What is he trying to say? What am I? Where's the left triangle? Something's not right.
That's an interesting observation. You're right. And there's nothing in there either, is there? No, I don't see it anywhere.
Yeah, no. I mean, the other one's got the credits, and the bottom one says Ultra Warrior, which is the title of the story. But the other one is just hanging there doing nothing.
I mean, 10-1 says it serves a purpose for some reason.
I don't know.
You're not going to be able to sleep at night. You need to reach out to Liam on Twitter.
I have to tell him I've lost hours of sleep every night because I can't get to sleep because I keep obsessing over this stupid triangle. What's going on? But
Maybe when we talk to the guys over at Lantern Cast, maybe they'll have their thoughts on it.
All right, my friend. Well, on that note, let's take a quick break, and we've got, I think, 3 pieces of listener feedback.
All right, sounds good.
What up, dweebs? This is Guy Gardner. You're listening to the podcast of OA.
All right, fellow Owens, welcome back. And this is our listener feedback segment. And we got 3 of them here. So first up, we got from Santiago, quotes, comment, hello there. I just finished Green Lantern Earth 1, Volume 2. Great book. Best GL stuff in a long time. I think it would be a great sci-fi TV miniseries. And for you guys, thank you for this great podcast. It helps us a lot in these difficult times, even miles away, like Argentina. All right. Well, first off, shout out to Argentina and shout out to Santiago in Argentina. And second, I'd have to agree with him. I think Volume 1 and 2 would make for a great sci-fi miniseries.
Yeah, if I was looking to do a Green Lantern movie and I wasn't worried about fitting into a comic book continuity, I would probably try to adapt those.
Mm-hmm. It would remind me a lot like Dune. Remember the old Dune? I don't know if you've seen the trailer for the new Dune, but that would be kind of like something I'm thinking of how it would be, or like Blade Runner for that matter. A kind of like a series stretched out. But only having Hal Jordan in it and Green Lantern, not even having the core members in there, but maybe have them in there as backup players in a certain degree, like John Stewart was in the second one.
Right, yeah, I agree. I loved Earth 1, Volume 2. I thought it was great. Both those books I think are fantastic, and I love the fact that they actually paid attention to the history and adapted it, but changed it and made it modern at the same time. It's this is going to be a little bit of a dig, but it's interesting to see and refreshing to see people do a science fiction take on Green Lantern who actually know something about Green Lantern.
Yeah, well, that's true too. And Gabriel Hardman's been good at that. He was a great writer on the first one, and he upped the ante on the second one. And I think the second one gained a lot of popularity in it, and I bet you 10-1 a lot of people went back and reread the first one after it.
Well, I'm sure and the first one got nominated for an Eisner.
Yeah. So
thank you from Argentina, Santiago. Appreciate it. Lionel Messi rocks. Anyway, from Andy, the subject is comic suggestions. It says, hey Myron, I'm looking for some help in where to start in reading Green Lantern. Many suggest the Johns run. I bought the first omnibus, and while I loved it, it was very confusing. I have DCU so I can go back as far as I want. I'm 48 and collected comics as a kid, then was away from it for 30 plus years. I love Bronze Age Marvel stuff. I'd like to know more of the history of Guy, John, and Kyle, etc. Anyway, I'm open to any help you can provide. I love your podcast. Don't get down. I know the news has been next to nothing. You and Phil do make a difference. Just listening to the show makes me want to go read Green Lantern. By the way, where can I find Phil on Twitter? Thanks a bunch. So thanks a lot, Andy, for responding. Where to start with Green Lantern is sometimes a tricky thing. And you've bought the first omnibus. I'm assuming you mean the first Jeff Johns omnibus. And it's a little, I don't remember whether that first omnibus has Green Lantern Rebirth in it or not. Let me take a quick look. Because that's really, in my mind, is the best place to start is with Green Lantern Rebirth if you're going to read the John stuff. And
my friend Brian just finished that omnibus too. He went and got the Jeff Johns one.
Yeah, it does have Green Lantern Rebirth in it.
Yeah.
So, what you could go back and read the old stuff. I think you would find it even more confusing because so many things are retrofitted in the Johns run. He kind of started over and took elements from the past and used it, but I don't know as if there's necessarily a lot of value in reading the old stuff other than for the enjoyment of it. If you're trying to kind of get into Green Lantern, the Johns run really is the best way to go. I think what might be helpful is to know the history up to that point when you get to Rebirth. And really what you need to know is that, Hal at the time of Rebirth, everybody's under the impression that Hal has gone crazy. He kills Kilowog. He kills Sinestro. He leaves a number of other Green Lanterns floating about in space in various states. He cuts off the arm off of Boudica. The Guardians basically commit mass suicide and take all of their energy, put it in a ring. They go to Earth and give it to Kyle. Kyle becomes a Green Lantern and tries to carry on. And then Rebirth comes. And at the time, Guy and John are still Green Lanterns. Well, no, actually, Guy's not in that book. Guy stopped being a Green Lantern, and he was. You discover he has alien DNA and has some other powers. I'm trying not to let my eyes roll too much. Hal became the Spectre, and basically Hal died as Parallax. He during Emerald Twilight, he goes into the Emerald Power Battery, absorbs all the power, and becomes essentially a villain. But the kind of I don't want to say villainous because he's not a mustache twirler. He's one of those things like, I need to right the wrongs because Coast City was destroyed, and I need to bring it all back. And if I'm going to fix things and make them right, I'm going to fix everything and make it right. And so Hal goes to great extremes to try to air quote fix things by undoing all the bad stuff that happens. So Hal eventually, when Earth is being attacked by Sun Eaters, Hal sacrifices himself to save the Earth and air quote dies. And his body is in the sun, essentially. And Cal carries on, and then that's kind of all you need to know to get into Rebirth. But I think Johns does a really good job of kind of redeveloping the universe and making it very new reader friendly. You and I, Phil, have been talking about the Johns run, and we started just reviewing it recently in recent episodes. So I hope that might help you a little bit. There is an issue or an episode of the podcast of Bova that I think covers all of Rebirth, and that might be helpful too. But there's some good old content in terms of knowing more about Guy and John and Kyle. We've done in the past. We did an episode that talked about Kyle's origins. I don't know as if we did John's. We did Guy's at one point. And one of the things I think I'll do is after this segment, before we close the episode out, I'm going to go back and pull out a segment from, I want to say it was maybe one of the first 20 episodes of the podcast of OA. We used to do a Green Lantern Spotlight. And this was when a gentleman by the name of Bill Giancoli was my co-host. And he and I would do this thing where we would do mock Skype calls to OA and interview different Green Lantern characters. And we had, for the longest time, Bill really hated Guy Gardner. So when we wrote up the Guy Gardner history, I'd read the origin of the character, give some touch points on the character, and then Bill would take that and write a script, and then his brother, who's an actor, would record the voice of the Green Lantern character, and then we would do a mock interview, and he and I would record the interview questions, and then Bill would take and edit it all together. So when we got ready to do Guy Gardner, we were like, you've been taking the snot out of Guy Gardner in every episode since we started this show. So why don't we do something where we're supposed to interview somebody else and Guy Gardner interrupts the call because he's tired of taking your crap. And so it was kind of funny. It was a 7-minute interview, and it's funny because there's a lot of bleeps in it because Bill's brother is Bill's older brother, and so there's that younger brother, older brother thing, and he's really kind of takes the snot out of Bill. So we had to beep some of it out, but it's kind of funny, and it gives history on Guy Gardner and some of his background at the same time. But he calls me Geek Boy at one point, so it's kind of funny. But I'll go back to that episode, edit the rest of the episode out so it's just that clip, and I'll insert it just so you guys can hear it. For those who've never listened to that particular segment, it was a fun series of segments we did way back in the day. I think we did Salak, and we might have done a third one. But it was a lot of fun. But I'm going to insert that in here. Phil, what is your Twitter handle?
It's at Phil Bova, PhilBova. Real easy to find. So
Andy, that's where you can find Phil on Twitter. And if you guys are on Twitter and you're not following Phil or I at Mine is Blog of OA, please follow us on Twitter. I mean, I don't spend a lot of time on Twitter because it's kind of become not a great place to socialize.
It's like a hate pool now.
Yeah, it is. It really has. It's kind of become an echo chamber of haters and cancel culture. but I still use it to promote content on the website and the podcast and interact with other Green Lantern fans that I follow. So please, please follow us and interact with us. We'd love to interact with people who are positive. But thanks for writing in. Phil, do you get anything to add to Andy's?
No, but he did bring up a point. We probably need to do Jeff Johns' origin story or something to do with Jeff Johns. I don't think we've done anything on him in a while. While he's not my favorite Lantern and I don't really care for him at all, we did Simon Baz, so I do like John Stewart better than I like Baz. So we should probably do something on him at some point soon.
Yeah, we should,
do him some justice.
It's interesting because John is very much, his origin is very much a product of the late '60s, early '70s. Yeah,
pretty much is.
But
he's still a cool character.
Yeah, maybe we've got an episode we need to record in a couple of weeks. Maybe we'll do the next issue of Jeff Johns' run, and we'll do a John Stewart origin.
Yeah, we could do that. That'd be cool.
Yeah. All right, we got one more, Phil.
One more, and this one's from Corey, and his subject is Green Lantern Earth 1 Volume 2 and The Green Lantern. Corey says, thank you for the review of Green Lantern Earth 1 Volume 2. I love the podcast, and finding it made me feel like the little bee girl from Blind Melon video, No Rain. When the Earth 1 volumes first came out, I wasn't sure if it was anything I wanted to buy, so I borrowed them from my local library. The Superman, Wonder Woman, and Batman, quote, sorry, Phil, Earth 1s were all okay, but my library never carried the Green Lantern Earth 1 Volume 1. First of all, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised with that. I had little to no expectations for the Green Lantern Earth 1 because the other books were so-so. Plus, I was unfamiliar with Gabriel Hardman and Karina Becco. So I waited a long time until a Comixology sale severely discounted the book. When I finally read it, I was absolutely blown away, finishing the book in one sitting. When Volume 2 came out, I reread Volume 1 as a refresher and immediately bought the new volume, again reading it in one sitting. Those two books are the best Green Lantern stories I've read in the last couple years, keeping in mind that I didn't read Volume 1 until a year or so after it came out. By comparison, I had high expectations for Grant Morrison writing Green Lantern, but I've largely been disappointed so far. I wish I was more excited about reading new issues, but I feel obligated more than anything to buy the book. I'm torn because I want to support this Green Lantern series, but my excitement for reading new issues is so low. Anyway, I started thinking about Grant Morrison's run on Green Lantern versus the Earth ones, and it's interesting that both do not use any inner monologue. They've each tossed out a common comic book trope, but the Earth ones read so much easier, whereas we're largely dredging to the end of each issue of the Green Lantern. I'm all for artistic vision, but Morrison has to understand he's constantly creating hard-to-consume reads and not making it easy to acquire new fans. I think comparing the Green Lantern to the Earth ones shows that it is not in the format the writers have chosen to deliver the stories. They each have beautiful art and lack inner monologue, but the Earth ones are a superior take on this awesome mythology. Anyway, keep up the great work and keep your power rings charged. I would have to agree with them. I mean, to be quite honest with you, I don't even compare the Earth ones to even the Superman ones or the Wonder Woman ones. I don't compare them to anything that has to do with mainstream continuity, if you want to put it that way. Not only that, I mean, they're two very, very, very different takes on the character, both in subject matter and I would say in mythology of the character base too.
Yeah, they are.
What do you think?
They're cut from two completely different pieces of cloth, and
yeah,
and I like the comment about being easy to consume. You're very right. I think the Morrison book is a little bit more difficult, and it's not new reader friendly. Like anything that Morrison does, it really it requires a lot more effort, and some people don't find that interesting. I think it's amazing to me. We were talking earlier about the sales figures, to think that this run is still selling as well as it's selling, when I've heard from a lot of fans who have not stuck with it. They haven't been able to. They're like, I'm going to wait and pick it up in trade later. Maybe it'll be easier to read, but I'm not going to buy the monthly issues. So I don't think it's getting the volume of sales that I think that anybody would expect from a Morrison book, but it's still doing relatively well when you compare it to the rest of the DC catalog, which I'm not sure if that says more about the Morrison run or less about the rest of the DC catalog. I don't know. But it is not something that some people get into, and I totally get it. Totally respect that. I'm hoping in my heart of hearts that when the Morrison run is over, that we get an announcement about a bunch of new stuff that is going to be new reader friendly and embracive of the entire mythology. In other words, more than one book, not having 3 or 4 lanterns stuffed in one book together. I think this franchise, either they need to invest in it wholly, or they need to basically clean things up and cull the herd a little bit, if that's what it takes.
I would agree with that. I'll mirror that statement, because I think to me the Morrison run has been segmented by itself. I don't think it's part. I don't feel like it's connected with any tissue to anything that has to do that's going on in the DC universe at all. Period. I kind of like sectionalized it or compartmentalized it outside of regular storytelling. Like with what's going on with the Flash. Sure, he may have appeared, but there's still no connective tissue that ties it in with any kind of the major events that are happening over in like Justice League, for that matter, or even in the Batman books that I don't read, that I don't have any clue if I'm saying that right or not. I don't see that there's any connective tissue in regards to those as well. So I've kind of taken it upon myself when this first started to say, well, this is probably going to be set in its own frame, by itself, outside continuity. Even if continuity is a thing anymore with the DC universe, it's hard to tell these days. Issues used to cross over a lot, and the Flash used to cross over with such and such, and you used to see storylines intertwined or whatnot. But it seems to me like even I read Wonder Woman all the time, and that storyline itself has been segmented, and it's going on its own free will, and it's not connected to anything else going on in the DC universe. So it seems like they're concentrating on just their characters and their independent storylines than they are about big crossover events. Like a lot of comic book Marvel does it a lot with the big crossover events. They got the big one going on now, Empire, where there's a big crossover with that and all these characters and stuff. And I think DC's doing it a little bit differently. I mean, besides Metal, DC, the Metal story arc. But again, I don't know where that falls in line in DC continuity, if it's part of the multiverse concept, because at this point I can't tell where things are and where they all fit into the bigger picture of their storytelling. And to me, Green Lantern does that because I feel like it's segmented by itself.
Yeah, earlier we talked about a little bit about our investment in DC, and I found it easier to be invested in the universe when I felt the universe was interconnected. And now it seems like everything is kind of on its own. And so you could read one thing and it doesn't matter because it's not interconnected with anything else. So I don't need to follow what goes on in the rest of the DCU because it doesn't feel like an organic universe. And I think that's one of the things I miss.
Yeah, I do. I like when storylines crossed over. I like when they intertwined a lot. I liked when they were reflective of one another. I thought that was kind of cool. I thought it made the storytelling a lot more fun, because then it made you want to go, oh, well, that's happening over in that book. Maybe I should go pick that up and check it out. And then 9 times out of 10, you might find something you like. But I mean, to me, I've always stayed with my main characters. It's always been Green Lantern, Superman, Wonder Woman, and the Flash, and Aquaman for that matter. And those have been my main characters that I've stuck with. And even by reading them, I feel like I'm just reading them as a singular aspect of parts of the DC universe where nothing's combined.
Yeah, I mean, I find myself being very nostalgic for the satellite era of Justice League, when I felt like these were people that all lived in a universe together because they had relationships with each other. they either, some of the times they got along, sometimes they didn't. I mean, I always loved listening to Carter Hall's Hawkman and Ollie get into arguments.
Yeah.
They weren't all, they were friends, they respected each other, but they still had their disagreements. But I felt like, as a young person, I felt like these characters were, I don't want to say real because that's hokey, but I felt like they lived in a universe together and they did things together. You had Ollie and Hal and Hal eating Ollie's chili, and you had relationships between the characters. And now it's kind of like, time you see them together is when they're guesting in a book together or it's an event, but there's no time for them to be people. It's just to deal with the plot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree, man. I miss those days too.
But anyway, thank you for all the feedback. We love hearing from you guys. So let's take a break. We'll play that Guy Gardner segment, and then we'll come back and wrap up the show.
Sounds great. I need to listen to that again too.
Well, Bill, I do have some bad news for this episode. We were going to have Izamat Cole on for another interview for our Green Lantern 101 segment, but he had to cancel due to disturbance in his sector.
So we apologize to all our listeners. We are going to have to postpone the interview for just...
Wait a minute. We've got an incoming call from Sector 2814. Hello?
Yo, it's Guy Gardner.
Mr. Gardner, I'm Myron Rumsey. I'm the creator of the blog of Oh, what a surprise.
I know who you are, Myron, and just call me Guy.
Hey, Guy, I'm Bill Giancoli, co-host of
That's
Podcast.
Mr. Gardner to you, Billy.
Well, what do we owe the honor to, Guy?
Yeah, Izamat mentioned he was interviewing with you guys today. When I heard he bailed, I thought I would fill in, see what these so-called spotlights are all about.
That's mighty nice of you, Guy.
What are you, an idiot? I said it's Mr. Gardner to you.
I thought we were joking.
Oh, right, because you're the funny one, right? The jokester? Mr. Ha-Ha? Mr. Big-Time Funny Man?
Well, I'd like to think we're actually both pretty funny.
Yeah, I'll get to you in a second there, Geek Boy.
Geek Boy?
Listen up, Billy Boy. When you're sitting on your soft butt talking smack about me, I'm out in the middle of some godforsaken galaxy defending lives from threats your puny mind couldn't understand.
I think I'm free to express an opinion if I would like.
So am I, and my opinion is that you're a big bag of shit that has his head so far up his own ass he can see his lunch.
Whoa, time out. Guy, we have kids that listen to this show, and we can't have you talking like that during an interview. Where's all this hostility coming from?
Probably from years of frustration dealing with scumbags from all sectors in the universe. Could also be hereditary, too, My old man wasn't the happiest camper on the planet.
So you had a rough childhood?
Yeah, I guess you could say that. Baltimore is not for the faint-hearted. You gotta watch your back in most neighborhoods. I had to watch mine on the street and in my home. Daddy was quick with the fist, if you know what I'm saying.
He hit you?
That's what I was not so subtly implying, Sherlock.
Wow. I'm really sorry to hear that. I'm impressed you were able to succeed coming from that kind of an environment.
Yeah, well, we all have weird things that motivate us. Not wanting to be a miserable, abusive father was mine. Found the best way to do that was to avoid home as much as possible.
So where did you go?
I would hang out around the neighborhood. This sometimes led to trouble.
How so, Mr. Gardner?
Run-ins with the law. Stupid stuff. Kid rebelling type of stuff. Luckily, my bro was a cop. This not only helped me skirt a few misdemeanors, but it led to my brother setting me straight.
So what'd your brother do to do that?
He helped me get into a college. See the value of an honest living. My brother showed me that people can do good in this life.
What did you study in college?
Education and psychology.
Hey, me too.
Oh, it's a real thrill to have something in common with you, Billy.
So, Guy, I thought I read somewhere that you played college football. Is that right?
Yeah, I was really something, too. Probably could have gone pro if it weren't for a bad injury.
You and Al Bundy.
Billy, we should play football sometime. No equipment, just my foot and your tiny little ball.
Yeah, well, Guy, what did you do when you weren't a Green Lantern? I mean, what did you do for a living?
I worked as a caseworker for prisoners. Man, that was just too close to home. Talking to those guys showed me where I could have ended up, you know? So I left that and taught special education before I got this whole galactic cop gig.
Just how did you get the ring?
Well, dip, it might be a little too complicated for you to follow, but it goes like this. Apparently, Abin Sur's ring found that I was equally deserving as Hal, but Abin Sur's jalopy crashed in Hal's backyard, so finders keepers.
Now, didn't I read somewhere that Booster Gold kind of had something to do with all that?
Yeah, there was some scuttlebutt about me in another reality where I was actually closer to the crash site, but Booster Gold convinced me to visit my dying father and make amends, so Hal was closer. Apparently, Hal had a vision that if I did get the ring first, I would have died a few months later, and he would end up with it anyways. Either way, I got a ring now and I know how to use it. The best record of how I got the ring is in Green Lantern Volume 2, number 59.
So the story goes, a boy from an abusive household on the mean streets of Baltimore works his way up to become a superhero and live the dream?
Living the dream, psh, right. This ring may give me awesome power, but it ain't no picnic.
I'll bet you've seen a lot, huh?
You could say that. Whether it was a massive earthquake that led to me getting hit by a school bus.
A bus?
Did I stutter, Billy? Yeah, a school bus. When I recovered and put the ring back on, I went to charge it and my battery exploded in my face.
Ouch.
Worse than ouch. Pain is temporary. This experience was slow torture. See, I was transported to the Phantom Zone.
The Phantom Zone? Isn't that the mirror thing in the Superman movie that General Zod was imprisoned in?
That's the one. Stuck in the hellhole with Zod himself. Where him and his Kryptonian thugs were torturing me non-stop. But that wasn't the worst of it.
How could it have gotten worse?
All this time, I'm getting the crap kicked out of me in this Phantom Zone. My psychic girlfriend at the time, Carrie Limbo, starts dating Hal Jordan.
That's low, bro.
Oh, we're bros now, are we, Billy? But for once in your stinking life, you're right. It sucked. But to both their credit, they thought I was gone.
Well, how did you get out of the Phantom Zone?
I was able to reach out to Carrie telepathically. But after I was freed, I was left comatose and brain damaged.
Wow.
You bet your ass, wow. You must know a little bit about being brain damaged, eh, Billy?
So what happened next?
Well, that's where John Stewart came in, and the Third Earth Lantern is born. Eventually, I'm revived during the Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Now, some of the things that I've read said that you were, well, how do I put this delicately? You were different after the explosion.
Define different, moron. I mean, Myron.
You were maybe a bit more arrogant or violent, or, maybe you just were a little more outspoken.
Huh. If you ever have a school bus hit you, a cosmic battery blow up in your face, transporting you to some kind of a limbo-like prison where you're tortured daily, all the while your girlfriend is getting romantic with a fellow Green Lantern and a so-called friend, well, yeah, you may develop a few undesirable personality traits yourself.
True, yeah.
What is it, Salak?
Lantern Gardner, I need you to escort a Sligian transport through outer limits.
Be there soon enough.
Time is short, Lantern Gardner.
I heard you. Don't get your alien panties in a bunch. Listen, Myron, I gotta go.
Hey, that's absolutely no problem, Guy. It's been an honor. Hopefully, can we do this again and follow up?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks, Guy.
Kiss my fat Billy.
I think he's warming up to me.
This is Salak, Green Lantern of Sector 1418, and you are receiving the podcast of Oa.
The podcast of
All right, fellow Owens and my good friend Myron. Another episode 176 in the bag. And it's been another great week, man. I feel like it's been a while since we've talked, and I won't lie. As time went on, I was like, man, I got sad not talking to Myron.
Yeah, we had I had some health issues there for a little while, and so we didn't record for a couple of weeks. And you and I are currently working on doing a guest appearance on the Lantern Cast for our annual State of the Green Lantern Union podcast episode.
Yeah, I can imagine it's going to be a 2-hour festival.
Yeah, you bet. It's gonna be a lengthy one, I think, because we're gonna be talking about how DC treats the franchise and what we think they should be doing. So that'll be, I think it'll be a lively conversation.
I think it's going to be lively, and I think it's going to be railing on DC a lot.
Yeah, yeah, I imagine, because I don't think any of us are happy with Green Lantern's place in the DCU right now.
But it's justified, and you know what? For all the listeners out there, they need to start a trend. I mean, a lot of you are active on Twitter. Start a hashtag and make sure you share it with us if you feel like Green Lantern's being underrepresented, which I think probably 95% of us fans feel that way. Start a hashtag. I mean, it can go a long way. I mean, we got the Snyder Cut, and it all started with a hashtag, and here we are years later getting a new version of the Justice League movie. So, your voice is your representation at this point. And, if you guys start something like that, make sure you include us, and, we'll share it with who we know. Things happen. They even got a thing going on now where bring Henry Cavill back as Superman, because, again, another character that's being underrepresented because they have to have Batman everything these days. And, and then I've heard Ben Affleck's coming back to play Batman again. It's like, come on, man, But anyway, start a hashtag, guys. If you come up with one, make sure you let us know, and we'll be happy to share it. We'll be happy to represent it as well, and the only thing you can do is get the word out.
That's right. So you and I will be back in a couple of weeks, and we'll talk about all the Green Lantern content from DC FanDome Day 2.
That'll be easy. That'll be a 1-minute segment.
Watch something happen that's not scheduled, that's not on the schedule yet, and we'll have to come back and eat crow.
But that's fine. I'm okay with eating. I'm okay with eating my words. If they want to surprise me, that's fine. I'm all for being the big surprised person. But do it. Follow through with it and do it. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm railing on the wrong people. Make me put my foot in my mouth. I'm fine with that. I will publicly apologize on this podcast to any member of the DC world if that takes place this Saturday.
So there we have it. The gauntlet is thrown down.
It is. It is. And you know what? I'll even take it a step further. Anybody out there listening, if they do surprise us, give me a Batman book that I have to be forced to read, and I will read it, and I will like it.
Wow.
Now that's dedication right there, man.
Phil's willing to make the ultimate sacrifice.
I will make the sacrifice, but I've got enough knowing that I don't expect that to happen, so I'm pretty comfortable in the fact that I won't have to worry about reading any Batman stuff.
Now, is this any Batman book?
Any Batman book, I read it. Now, I've already read The Long Halloween, but that's been a long time ago, and I've already read Nightfall. I did that a long time ago too. So, I mean, if it's something current, I'll read it. Oh, I read Court of Owls, I think, at one time. That's about it. Haven't gotten too much involved with Batman over the course of the year. Just sporadic stuff here and there. But, I still read him. He's still in Justice League. Hell, he's in everything that you read nowadays. I mean, he appears in every book. Doesn't matter what character it is. So he's always there. So I'd have no problems reading a book of his. So I'll read it, man. But don't make me read Simon Baz anymore.
So an omnibus isn't off the table, is it?
Ooh, that might be a little tough. I might not be able to swallow that one. But I will say this: a lot of it has to do with time. Because please note that I got a 7-month-old, so my time reading has become limited lately. So be nice when it comes to your recommendations.
So there you have it. Phil has laid the gauntlet down. Somebody let Jim Lee know that.
That's right. 2 things: public apology, and I'll read a DC book that somebody has to recommend. And you can put it on my Twitter if you want. Rail me on Twitter. I'm fine with that.
There we go.
And you know what? Tell me I ate my words. Come after Saturday if there is some Green Lantern reveal. And tell me I'm wrong. I'm all for it. I don't have much stock and faith that I'm going to be wrong with it, but I'll hold on to some hope. So I got St. Walker in my corner.
It's a bold bet, but I think you're playing the safe money.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, my friends, we'll be back in a couple weeks. Till next time, treat each other well, keep your power ring charged, and make every day your brightest day. The Podcast of OA is the official podcast of the blog of OA and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can send your emails to podcast@blogofoa.com. You can also find the Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.